Healthy Hillsides is a case study about how we are applying the principles of the sustainable management of natural resources to a key issue affecting these communities.
This is freed habitat, and it's a mosaic of habitat. So you have bracken, you have marshy grassland and flushes, you have scrub habitat, you also have heathland habitats, and it sits between the lowlands and the uplands, and it's that marginal band of habitat which runs the length of the valleys. So we're looking at the bracken here, and this is an area of land which isn't managed presently. So when you look, there's a very, very deep layer of dead material, and there's absolutely nothing growing underneath. Now this time of year you would expect to see some shoots coming up of the species-rich grassland which underlies it. So all this layers on top of it is smothering that out completely. All this dead material is fantastic kindling for fires. The fire service call it the big fuel load. This is what goes up in flames, and it can continue right away across the freed habitat. So as part of the freed mosaic you have flushes, which they are small little watercourses which rise in these hillsides and then flow down the valley. Whilst very small individual ones, they all collect down into the river. So when these watercourses travel through this burnt landscape, it picks up all the dead carbon, the dead materials, the soils, it causes erosion, it takes pollutants down into the watercourse. And having this happen throughout the valley and throughout this hillside can have a much bigger effect down in the rivers when it's all being dragged into the watercourses, and it'll impact on our water quality. It can have an impact on our drinking water. It costs more money to clean that water up. It costs more money to improve the habitats for fisheries or for the invertebrates or the general wildlife of rivers. So that knock-on effect from the hillside is noticed in the watercourses as well.
Fire breaks, natural fire breaks are closing up. Footpaths are closing up due to brambles and the grasses and the bracken taking over, and these fires are now getting larger because of this. And this is one of the reasons why the fire service have moved into a sort of land management role, because we've got this mantra that we've tried to stop the arsonists, and we can't stop them all. We can't control the weather, but what we can do is manage the fuel. And one of the ways of fighting fire is to remove the fuel, and that's what we're now doing. And to deal with these fires, traditionally we've thrown resources, thrown firefighters at these fires. Traditionally it was with beaters walking up the mountains in structural fire kit and beating these fires out. And we've had incidents where there's been 20 fire engines putting out a grass fire on the Brecon beat guns. And now we've moved on, and we now start to use fire to fight fire. We use fire before the fire season, where we're managing vegetation, fuel. We're managing it, we're creating narrow fire breaks. We don't burn landscapes, we create narrow fire breaks in strategic locations that stop these large fires.
There's a number of sustainable management options for the hillsides. Conservation grazing, if you're looking at all of the benefits of that hillside, so all of the functions it provides, that's the one that comes out of giving them most multiple benefits. It retains the mosaic landscape and the complexity of the landscape, which is good for both ecology and flood risk and amenity as well. So bracken bruising is one of the pilot management techniques that we were trialling, and we're really lucky to have heavy horses come in, and the benefit of those is that they can tackle on the steep slopes, so slopes that aren't accessible to the machinery that we had available. And also one of the side benefits was it also brought the community in, so it was a very good way of engaging locally in the work that we were doing. And the impact of that bracken bruising is that it reduces the vigour, so the fires are creating a condition where the bracken's coming back stronger and more dominant every year, and you lose all of those plant species underneath and all of the diversity around that. So by reducing the vigour you get a really broad diversity in and amongst that. So we're not eradicating the bracken, we're just reducing it so it doesn't become that dominant spread across the hillside. And bracken bruising has that sensitivity for real ecological gain as well as benefits when it comes to reducing the fire risk.
So here we're looking at a much thinner layer of bracken. This is far more natural, part of the mosaic of freed habitat. So you can see already, this is the same time of year, And we've got some bluebells coming through here. So that bracken in a thin layer replicates the deciduous woodland habitat, so it's very shaded. So you get these species like violets and bluebells coming through in these habitats. So this is a lot healthier. You have that variety of species, and in that comes the variety of invertebrates and reptiles and birds. In order to make this a long-term and sustainable project, we need to work with communities for them to take ownership of this issue. In other countries, it is quite common practice to manage that area between the hillside and your property to reduce the risk, to prevent the fire from taking hold of your home. This would also act as a buffer strip for preventative measures for fire service. They would know where to go, but it would also be a nice buffer for habitat, better for various invertebrates, for birds, to create that nice little strip. So in order to do this, we're working with the fire service to teach the communities what they can do to manage that. So the first couple of years we will be undertaking that practical management, but working with the communities so they can eventually take that over, so that we can then move on to another site and teach another community about how to protect themselves from fire.
So the last 20 years there have been over 76,000 wildfires across the South Wales valleys. 96% of these fires are deliberately set arson wildfires. And what we've done a lot of work over the years to try to reduce the number of arson related wildfires, but what we've seen is the harder we work to reduce the numbers, the larger the fires, subsequent fires become. For the last 8 years we've been working in partnership with Rhondda Cynon Taf Council and NRW and trying to look for solutions to these antisocial fires. So rather than in the past, traditionally the fire service would try to stop the numbers of wildfires. But what we've found is that the lower the numbers we get, the larger the fires become. So we've worked in partnership with NRW and local authorities to try to look at new ways of managing the landscape, whether that's prescribed burning, cutting fire breaks, or reintroducing grazing, which is part of what the Healthy Hillsides project is doing. The differences I've seen in wildfires is 20 years ago, working in Tonopandi Fire Station, we would be in and out 10, 15 wildfires a day, small nuisance fires. And over the years, the number of calls dropped, but the fires became much larger and much harder to tackle. And that's why we started a wildfire project where we purchased ATVs and we now train firefighters how to deal with wildfires. So South Wales Fire and Rescue Service have totally changed the way they manage wildfires. In the past, at the start of the grass fire season, we would make sure we had beaters on the fire engines, make sure we had bottles of water. Now we've totally evolved the way we think. It's a year-round solution to a seasonal problem. We have a wildfire toolbox. We have crews out prescribed burning in high-risk areas without cutting, and we now have lightweight kit. We have ATVs, we have 4x4s, and every firefighter receives training. We work with a helicopter that is provided by NRW, and we have all these different tools now in our toolbox so we can actually fight these fires a lot safer and we can protect our communities better. I grew up in the Rhondda Valley and we were always surrounded by sheep. There were sheep everywhere, there were sheep in the towns, there were sheep on the hillsides. And what we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years is a reduction. There's still sheep on the mountains, but they're now in paddocks lower down. They're not up on the uplands where they used to be. They're not free roaming and grazing. And yeah, because of that, we've seen an increase in tree growth. So there's a lot more trees on the valleys. A lot of the valleys have become rewilded, but with that then we've seen larger fires because the sheep are not eating, managing the vegetation, the grazing animals are not there to reduce the vegetation, and they're also not using the paths which used to break up and stop the fires. So again, all of these issues, they're quite complex issues. We've seen the sheep removed off the Brecon beacons because of the parasites in sheep urine going into the drinking water supplies. And these are short-term solutions because we're now getting much larger fires on the Brecon beacons. In 2017 we had an 800 hectare fire, and in 2020 we had a 1,200 hectare fire on the Brecon beacons. The issues with this is we're very lucky that these fires have occurred when the water table is very, very high, very wet in April, but if we would have the same sort of fires in June or July, which could burn into the peat, we could then get all this pollution, which has been there many years from the Industrial Revolution, is going to dissolve into the water, into the rainwater, and wash down into our drinking supply. So again, we need to look at long-term solutions, not quick fix solutions. With the prediction of climate change, and only this week, the DEFRA briefing with a 2 to 4 degree increase in temperature, the predictions of wetter, warmer winters, which will increase the growing season, and drier, hotter summers. So that is, all of these problems are going to cause more problems for us as a fire and rescue service, and more problems for wildfire, and also through the winter then flooding. And then looking at the problems of wildfires, removing the vegetations off the steep valley slopes, and how that then affects landslides and landslips of the future, which is what you see in America and what you see on continental Europe.
About 20 years ago was my first experience of a bad fire season, actually in the South Wales Valleys when I worked for the Forest Commission Wales. I remember at the time saying to myself, next time, we've got to be better prepared. And throughout my career then, at the beginning of every fire season, when I've had responsibilities that involve dealing with wildfire, I've thought to myself, why have I not done more to get ourselves better prepared? So I think we are better prepared. The work that HAF and colleagues are doing will get us better prepared for the coming fire season. That's good. I actually think the situation is better overall as well. As far as I can see, the trends show there are fewer fires overall. That's good. But I think it's also getting worse due to climate change. So I think it is getting better, but we need to get better further, faster even than we are at the moment in order to adapt to climate change.
South Wales Fire and Rescue Service introduced, we started doing land management in 2012, working with the Brecon Beacons National Park, learning from them, prescribed burning with them. We'd had some training overseas and we brought that back to South Wales and working with the National Park. And then we started doing our own prescribed burns, and then that moved on and we started looking at different land management, and the Healthy Hillsides project started, and we started using an iCut. Well, it was a remote control cutter. It happens to be the iCut we're using at the moment. And there's been a lot of, not negativity, but people ask, why are the fire service doing land management? Well, it's again, why do we fit smoke alarms in people's houses? Why do we ask the public to drive safely? Because if we can solve the problem at the source, we can make everybody safer. And that's the same, if we can get involved, if we can raise issues and then try to achieve something, such as creating fire breaks, people will understand, they'll see it works, and hopefully then I'll educate people and we can all move on together. So it's not really the fire service's job to be out cutting grass, if that's the term you want to use, but again, if that can save lives and make communities safer, that's what we need to be doing. During my career, I've been really fortunate. I've done a lot of travelling. I've been to South Africa and I've learned off the South Africans. I've been to Spain, I've been to Portugal, I've been to France. And then not only have I taken ideas from them, I've given them ideas as well. I've kind of prescribed burning in Portugal, where we make communities safe, and then you come back and you can use the same tactics. And what I've been very fortunate, because we're at the start of our wildfire journey, whereas a lot of these other countries are well advanced compared to what we are, we can take what's worked and what's proven to work and then bring it back to Wales and make it fit our procedures. We're involved in a number of European projects. I'm involved in the Flamework project, which is based in Portugal, which is trying to bring learning together. We do a lot of work with the Pau Costa Foundation, which again is about education and enabling people to deal with wildfires. And we're also, South Wales, are involved in the AVAN project, which is the Advanced Fire Analyst Network, where we are building on fire analysis and trying to make a toolbox which can be used across Europe.
Since understanding how wildfires are created and how to tackle them, we've had a massive reduction in those fires. We've seen a great change in wildfires in this area. We had an awful lot of antisocial behaviour which brought about a lot of those wildfires. The season seemed to start early and continued throughout the summer. But that's changed considerably since we started working with South Wales Fire and Rescue, cutting fire breaks, but B, looking at putting a greater presence on the common so that there is less opportunity for that antisocial behaviour of wildfires to be able to take hold. We went into this by looking at what the biodiversity was on the common. We mapped out through an ecologist the areas where there were particular species, whether they be bird, grasses or whatever. We mapped that out and we cut a grid of fire breaks into that, protecting the wildlife and protecting the user on the common. The strategy has to really be about education and activity as well. It can't just be one thing, it has to be a complex plan of multi-users and multi-partners. That way then you educate the individuals that use it and you also get into the habit of doing things correctly and improving the landscape and the biodiversity around it. So the benefits for putting in this activity has been that we've improved the biodiversity, we've protected rare species, we've educated the local users that use it, and we have less fires. So all in all, I think it's a huge benefit all round.
One thing I've learned, and from my experiences, is fire is everybody's problem, and that is seen in different countries around the world now, whereas in Wales, in South Wales, it's seen as a fire services problem, but I think the problem starts before us. We are the sticking plaster trying to stick over the cut. The cut is the land management side, whether that's forestry, whether that's farming, grazing. We need to be thinking, we need to be working together and having these difficult conversations about what does land management look like and what does it look like for the future. There's a lot of talk of rewilding, which sounds fantastic, but again, will rewilding bring larger fires and more complicated fires for the Fire and Rescue Service to try to deal with? And this is why we all need to work together. We need to pull all our ideas together, and if we have to discuss, we can be frank, we can be open and honest, and we can move forward together.
Healthy Hillsides, working together for a wildfire-wise Wales.